Hey everybody, I'm Nickel Skinner with Skinner Games, and this is Game Reviews in 5 minutes or less. In this installment, we'll be talking about the hero's journey. And no, not this edition, we already did this one. The new one. So in the Hero's Journey 2nd edition, the author James Spann got together with Gallant Knight Games to make an excellent new rendition of a very fantastic OSR game. As you can see, it has amazing cover art by one of my favorite artists, John Hodgson. The interior art is done by Nicholas Giacondino, whose name I hope I said right, and Mike Bradu. So here's an example of the interior art. You can see the lovely page border. So we have a nice little cameo from the author here, and that is just quite the swashbuckler. There are a lot of other really great pieces in this book, but since it's still in Kickstarter, I don't want to spoil it for you. So the first edition of the game adheres more to the OSR movement. You get the standardized set of attributes, your strength, your dexterity, your con, your intelligence, your wisdom, your charisma, etc. In the second edition, however, James has expanded on these ideas and added some new ones. So while there are definitely analogs like might to strength, there's a sixth attribute that is wholly new. It is called Weal, or wheel, or whale, however you want to say it. So this is more like destiny. How has fate worked into the life of this character? And whatever your attribute modifier is in Whale gives you advantage for those who have played the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons on whatever rolls. However, if you have a negative modifier, the narrator of the game gets to invoke disadvantage. So that's a fun little way to control a little bit more of what your character can accomplish in games. Now, one thing that I liked about the first edition of this game was the addition of professions, so it gives them a little bit more of a background. And this is also included in the second edition, which I am super grateful for. This also helps to determine your starting gear and starting cash. This game encapsulates more of what James thought of as epic fantasy. And this includes the races and the classes. The races, now called Lineages, and the classes, which are called Archetype. So in the Lineages, you get your classic dwarf, elf, human, half-elf, halfling, and no orcs or gnomes, but you do get a new one called a changeling. Now this isn't the kind of changeling that you think of when you think of maybe Eberron. For those who read a lot of Irish literature, you'll find mentions of changelings in a lot of those stories. You also get an interesting variant of the human called an errant human. Now these humans are those who have been pulled into a fantasy world from a normal reality. Think of Narnia or Paul Anderson's 3 Hearts and 3 Lions. Now the archetypes, your classes, see a lot more variation. You have the bard and the burglar, the knight and the ranger, the swordsman and the warrior, the wizard and the yeoman. So 2 things that I really like about the knight are the hospitality ability and the chance to acquire a squire. Now, since knights in mythologies and historical stories are usually capable of walking up to a local lord and expecting a kind of hospitality to be granted to them, say a room for the night and a meal, in the game, it works itself into that in this hospitality ability. So if a knight in a party approaches a castle, the lord respectfully, and the knight expectfully can assume that basic accommodations are met. So those parties with the knight can save a little cash. Now who doesn't like a patsy? So assuming that your knight has a high enough bearing to require a squire, they can get one at first level, which can really be a benefit to you in your adventuring. There's a difference between the swordsman and the warrior. The swordsman is more of your basic swashbuckler, which is the picture I showed you earlier of the dwarf, and the warrior is more of just your basic soldier. So the yeoman is really built on serving the company, serving the party, even serving a particular individual in that party. Think of a heroic Sam Gamgee to your Frodo Baggins. And because of that, they get special benefits and bonuses to combat and other things to help their particular charge and can inspire other people to action. He also incorporates despair mechanics, because your characters don't always face things that are happy and go lucky, and that's going to have an effect on your psychology eventually, in addition to being grievously wounded. So you don't just get hurt and everything's all great. Sometimes it can cause permanent damage, loss of limb kind of damage, which makes getting hurt just that much more lethal in this game. But at the same time, there are still house rules and other things that you can do to make it more heroic and dramatic. And while the magic's still very based on a Vancian-style magic system, the way that James has it organized is very unique. So instead of just having spells with maybe a single effect, many of the spells have multiple effects that you can choose. For instance, the Errant Pilgrim spell, which is an apprentice level spell for newer characters, has these 3 abilities: Step Safely Upon the Path, Scent the Beast, and Weather Ward. And each of these has a slightly different function to the greater spell. And so while those spell lists might not look as long, There are 3 levels of spells: Apprentice, Journeyman, and Master, and each of these has a handful of spells, but each of these spells has multiple effects. There are also a lot of really amazing and interesting creatures in the menagerie in this book. One of my very favorites is the lindworm, that it's potentially a generational problem, which could make for very interesting adventures. So I could continue to kind of really break this down. This really is meant to be a short video, and I don't want to reveal too much of the game. Suffice it to say, I'm super excited for this release. I really loved the first edition of this game, and the second edition of the game just hammers on that mythology in the way that I absolutely love. As I stated before, it's currently on Kickstarter. I will post a link in the description below. Go and support this game, and if you liked our review, please let us know in the comments below, and consider supporting us on Ko-fi, which we will also post a link to, and sharing the link so that other people can know about this amazing game from such a wonderful writer. I hope you all have a wonderful time at the table, and as always, happy gaming.